Hello everyone, I am a Formula One specialist, I am a journalist, my name is Takis Pournarakis, and I have the honor to be your moderator on a very related to me topic. The Senior Vice President of Global Motorsport of Nielsen Sports, Mr. Nigel Geach, is here with us. Having worked in sports sponsorships for more than 3 decades, mainly with clients in the motorsport before Formula One, Mr. Gies will talk to us about the evolution of sponsorship in motorsport industry. The stage is yours, Mr. Gies.
Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon to everybody listening to this virtual conference. As I was saying earlier on, I was looking forward to a nice weekend in Greece this weekend, but unfortunately, matters out of our control meant that we couldn't be all together. But let's hope that the presentation that I'm going to give to you is going to be interesting. As I was introduced, I've been involved in sponsorship and sport for over 30 years. My company, which I started many years ago, looked at all sport, so I have a broad view of what's happening in the sponsorship and sport market. In the last years, I've been concentrating to develop for Nielsen Sports to be the company involved in the marketing of motorsport, and also to really look at the commercial aspects of the global trends in sponsorship, especially in motorsport. The presentation today will be a formal presentation, and there will be time afterwards to ask questions. Please just store your questions and ask them. Don't worry about being controversial, and if you don't understand something, then please let me know. The topics that I'll actually talk about today is that I think it's worth looking at what's happening in the sports industry generally throughout the world. We live in unprecedented times. I'm not going to dwell too much on what's happened in the last year, because I think that it has been incredibly unusual, and therefore, we don't want to taint what we're trying to do for the next few months, and obviously this year, when we hope and believe that COVID-19 will be finally tamed and the vaccination program will be worldwide, and we'll reply and get back to trying to be a little bit more normal, whatever the new normal is. So a little bit about the sports industry trends, because of course they filter through to the trends in the motorsport industry. The three key commercial trends that are shaping the sports industry or the sports landscape, which have mainly implications for sponsorship, whether it be in motorsport or whether it be sporting activities worldwide. Sporting industry really does have lots of competition. Gone are the days when you could only watch sport on a few TV channels in your country. It's facing fragmenting audiences. That means that audiences are choosing what they can watch. They don't have to watch just football, motorsport, horse racing. They can watch basketball. They can watch basketball in Europe. They can watch handball. They can watch all sorts of different sports. And what's happening is that, products and the implications mean that products and brands involved in sponsorship are having to have greater business sophistication. That is a good thing because brands are needing greater flexibility when they get involved with assets, and rights holders, the people who own those assets, have to actually work with the brands to ensure that those targets and also the reasons for sponsoring are actually met. I always call it 1 + 1 = 3, whereby the brands work together with the rights holders and produce a really excellent result. We also know, and even people of my age know, that digital content is now becoming king. That means that what one puts out in the social and digital world is very, very important. And as this becomes more prevalent, in the younger millennial and even the Generation Z audience, this has becoming very much more important. And it isn't just enough to put your sports program, whether it be a soccer match, a rugby match, a tennis match, or indeed a Formula One race onto the television and just produce it like that. The king of being digital means that the behind the scenes, the quick action, the small little nuances whereby we find out what's happening off camera, we find out behind the scenes what's happening. That is really important for sponsors to create a significant, richer and greater value to engage fans. Fans are the lifeblood of sport and the lifeblood certainly of motorsport. I think sport and our society is becoming more and more interlinked. And I think referring back to something like COVID-19 last year and indeed this year, successive governments throughout the world have tried to keep sport in the forefront of the activity for fans and also the general public. Certainly in the UK, the Premier League was stopped for a few weeks, and we did find socially that was a problem. And so it's very, very important that sport is the lifeblood of people's lives, and also in difficult times, it can be a little bit of, sort of nice things to do is to watch sport and to also watch their favorite sportsman. So sport in our society is becoming increasingly interlinked, but the sport's social role and the implications for sport is that changes a brand's attitude to their brand marketing. So going just quickly and a little bit more deeply in what's happening in the fragmentation of audiences. And when I talk about sports here, it is very much motorsport as well. The attention spans of fans is shortening. We all know, and certainly, as I said earlier, the people of my age, we're used to watching a 90-minute football match, a 90-minute or even 2-hour Formula One race. And that can be a problem for the future of the attention of the audiences to keep to that length of races. There have been discussions with Formula One and even other motorsport series about having a shorter race, maybe sprint races and what have you. I think probably rightly, Formula One have said no, they will try and make the racing more interesting, and we can come on to how that's happening later on. So attention spans are shortening, and this is not only in sport, but it's in anything. And short form video are becoming more and more important. There are more things that are competing for consumer attention. Not only on a Saturday or Sunday, can families or the males or indeed the females sit down and watch a football match for 90 minutes and not have something pressing to do. They need to go to the supermarket, they need to take the kids to ballet or hot soccer or something like that. And more we're becoming more and more integrated throughout the week and indeed the weekends. So sport is attempting to cover that as well, so that there are more opportunities to either record on live TV, and not only looking at live TV, but having highlights programs. And generally, we're finding that highlights programs, or where you get a sports center whereby you can look at various sports, are becoming more popular. Again, that leads on to media consumption, by that I mean the way that people consume media, how they watch it, whether it's TV, whether it's on a smartphone, or indeed whether it is on the radio or on even Twitter or Snapchat or things like that. And the younger generations are watching less TV. That is a fact. They're generally watching less TV. That is traditional TV and the TV that you have in your living room. They're watching it more on smart devices, smaller screens, and indeed, sort of while they're second screens while they're doing something else or watching something else. This is just a couple of quotes. John Allett, who's the CMO of McLaren, he says, we have tightly controlled asset registers, but we're evolving to make sure that the partnership is more fluid with brands. And that comes, there are many, many examples how brands and rights holders, as I said earlier on, are actually working better together. The same with Nathan Homer's comment, and this is in golf. So there are various examples here. I won't go through all of them, but in Major League Baseball, leverage behind the scenes activity. And I will mention that one of the greatest achievements for Liberty Media on the TV side was to commission Netflix to do the Drive to Survive programming, which is actually, I think they've just completed after last year their third series, which has been a great success. Drive to Survive, for those who haven't seen it, is a behind the scenes documentary. It has, I think, 10 or 12 episodes. It's on Netflix, and it goes behind the scenes of every Formula One team and has a 55-minute program to show what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening in the drivers' lives when they're not on the track. How they're looking at the technical side, but not only the technical side of racing, but also what they do at home, what their families are doing. And it created an unprecedented behind the scenes documentary, which the key plus for that was to introduce other people into Formula One. Formula One has no problem about what we call the avid fan, the fan that watches 10 or 12 races a year. They are committed people. But what happens in any sport is that there is what we call the churn, which is the people who go out of Formula One and come back in. And that can be up to 30% of the total audience. So it's really important that sports, and especially motorsport, carries on having documentaries, behind the scenes activity to bring in people who traditionally wouldn't have been involved in motorsport, who wouldn't have actually watched motorsport. And I find it, and I expect many people who are in the industry find it, that quite a lot of people say to me when I'm meeting them or whatever, oh, I watched Drive to Survive, that documentary on the behind the scenes, and it seems really interesting. I'm going to watch Formula One next weekend, which can only be right. And this goes not only in motorsport, but Liverpool Football Club, which is, as you know, a great Premier League football club, allowed people to have access to the grassroots teams and the access to Liverpool legends. And the same with NFL. Bose, Microsoft integrated themselves into the match day. Short form video is really important now, is to get a shorter form rather than the long form, which is the full race or the full event. And cricket, which I know probably in Greece is not a huge sport, but the cricket is a long sport. It runs for 5 days. So, to be able to watch it over 5 days, you have to be pretty dedicated. So again, the International Cricket Council created highlights from the International Cricket Council events on short form. And clips for revenue also, which that means that you can have sponsored clips, which obviously brings additional revenue to the sport. The case study for the European Tour shows that traditional rights holders are needing to broaden their content efforts. And here we see the behind the scenes of where the golfers are interviewed off camera. They're doing live shows on TV, and even carpool karaoke, which is a crazy comedy program where they interview sports stars or even politics. So there is a commercial aspect to doing this as well, which shouldn't be forgotten. And new types of content are being created for fragmenting audiences, to bring people into it. Formula E, which is the electric motorsport series, are doing behind the scenes, and Joe Media, which is a media group, are creating something which is interesting to everybody. backyard legends, again, cricket in Australia, to show how people, grassroots people are carrying on through cricket. So another aspect where it is very important is corporate social responsibility. And this is probably in motorsport more difficult to do because it is, you know, at the end of the day, we do motorsport burns fossil fuels, and, you know, it is an issue with regard to the world out there. So we've got, motorsport generally has got created a discipline for brands. And in the old days, they would do something separate, and now it's totally integrated into their sponsorship portfolio. And, you know, we're all trying, Formula One is trying to be carbon neutral, which can only be good for society as a whole. And what the research that we have found, and we carry out a lot of research over the years for motorsport and other sports, is that at the end of the day, the consumers will pay for more socially responsible products than they will for non-socially responsible products. And there are various initiatives, Football Foundation in Real Madrid, Major League Baseball, and a Green Initiative. So that's what's happening in the main sports industry trends. And why I did that is to show that I always believe that motorsport shouldn't be taken totally in isolation. And you can see now how what's happening with regard to Formula One and other motorsport landscapes. Sustainability is very, very important. As I mentioned before, it's top of the agenda for brands. And we saw that actually fans will buy a greater amount of socially acceptable situations whereby in this case of motorsport, road relevant technology strives to find out efficiency and sustainability. And actually, one of the biggest secrets that was actually never really put out by Mr. Eccleston is that many years ago, probably 8 years ago now, the KERS system of attracting, you know, sort of harvesting energy by braking was created in Formula One. And actually Formula One has been hybrid for many, many years. The only problem that was had in those days was that I think Formula One didn't tell people about it, which was in retrospect the wrong thing to do. But now it's has you know, sort of DRS systems, it has KERS systems, and it has efficiency and sustainability. And there's even talk about having you know, sort of engines which are not running on fossil fuel. And again, what I've said before, one of the situations in motorsport is delivering high quality digital content and, of course, expanding the fan base. Now, just talking through the first aspect of that, very relevant to Formula One, is that back in 2013, which you know, is 8 years ago now, the FIA introduced an action for the environment. In 2014, as I mentioned, the hybrid turbo engine was started. And after that, it led to the KERS system. And as we know, in 2022, which has been delayed for 1 year to 2022, there's going to be a cost cap and also new regulations which focus very much on sustainability. And what's happened also, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, is that major brands involved in Formula One over the years have really pushed Formula One and pushed motorsport to be more involved in sustainability. Now, the second aspect is enhancing fans' digital experience and how sponsorship has changed that as well. And we've seen with the companies that have come into Formula One, and I'm talking mainly about Formula One now, but I think one also knows that things like the Stephen Rattel organization of sports car racing and the GT World Championship, AWS of Amazon Web Services is also involved in that, and creating digital quality and the ability to create, you know, sort of good technology in the motorsport field. New platforms, F1 TV global expansion, new technology, leveraging the AWS partnership. And also as I mentioned before, one of the most important things to create a wider audience and to create wider sponsorship is to be always on and off track, the emotions, the personal life, the funny moments, the behind the scenes, as I mentioned, with regard to Formula One and the Netflix production. And of course, you know, influencers are very important, digital influencers, and drivers' sport and sponsorship exposure is increased from that. Traditionally, exposure was created by TV exposure. You will have seen the phrase advertising equivalence evaluation. That means the amount of exposure that that brands obtained in Formula One on the car, on the suit, on the billboard around the side. And you'll see now that how important influencers and digital is. With one of the figures is that the followers on Instagram for Formula One is 40. Other drivers is 40%. Lewis Hamilton takes 37%. So it is very important that young drivers, and Lewis is considered not a young driver now, but Lando Norris and George Russell are coming up the States with a number of people that are actually have followers who engage in the use of social media. And Formula One is growing beyond the traditional fan. I mentioned that traditionally Formula One was not an older audience, but the average age, I think, was 40 years old, which means that, you know, sort of that's the average age. And one of the problems with Formula One and also motorsport is that it was really, you know, sort of a base that was an older demographic, the people who are watching it. And what happens with older demographics is they get older as the years go on, obviously. But I think Formula One and motorsport was not bringing in and attracting either both women and also millennials and also the younger content. And what's happened now is that due to COVID last year, is that if you remember, there was some very good Formula One esports series before the season started off in July. And there were not only Formula One drivers, but there were other sports people who took part in it. And it brought in the young demographic. There are more opportunities now for females on and off the track, either on STEM in engineering situations, or indeed in racing. And you'll see that Tatiana has joined Alfa Romeo, and also W Series, which is the all women series, is now a support race to Formula One. And so, you know, it's important to bring in new fans. And also one of the most important things also is to continue to go globally. I was talking earlier on with regard to how Formula One is global, but there are traditional areas of Formula One. Europe is very, very popular for Formula One. South America is very popular for Formula One. Japan used to be very popular for Formula One, but of course that's a little bit died off because there haven't been, you know, sort of Formula One drivers in that particular area. And with regard to that, also it comes down to, we were talking, one of the titles of this this presentation is how sponsorship, what's happening in sponsorship, you know, how the deals happening, what's happening in motorsport. And it's quite interesting to show that, as some people will remember, the big deals in sponsorship in the tobacco era were huge. But of course, post-tobacco, everybody was very concerned that the money coming into Formula One was going to go down. And it's quite interesting that it was a slower process. But what's happening now is that the deals in Formula One and in motorsport the big deals are reducing, but there are a lot more deals in the middle sector under what I call 20 million. And so it's quite interesting that different sectors which are happening, and also how people like Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, the Rolexes and the Emirates are still there, and also the DHLs. So there's a great mixture of Formula One sponsors. And this is just the chart. I'm not going to go through every chart, but it just shows that the deals under 50 million are categorized into different situations. alcoholic drinks, sportswear, technology is high, and you'll see, sort of transportation, energy and fuel. And one area which is coming up very much more now is what we call the energy and fuel sector, and that's not only the oil companies, but people like INEOS, which is a sponsor of petrochemicals, and they are now, as has been said, they are potentially buying a stake in the Mercedes team. The big deals, just running through them over the years, Philip Morris, over many years, a partner of Ferrari, Petronas, Martini, which now is finished, Castrol, Tag Heuer, Hilton, all big names in sponsorship. And you'll see now some of the deals in Formula One, which have gone through. It's always very difficult to get the values of the deals because they are value in kind. They're not only rights, but they are also backup and extrapolation with regard to sort of entertainment at the circuits, which of course didn't happen last year. So going a little bit into the fans, because the fans at the end of the day are the lifeblood of the events, whether it be sort of football, whether it be motorsport, whether it be Formula One, or whether it be race car, single seat series in America, or even touring cars in the individual countries, or world touring cars, or rallying, or even MotoGP. You can see that Formula One itself has still the largest global fan base with regard to motorsport, followed by MotoGP, and then on Formula E and other series and NASCAR are less than that. It's always difficult to look at the global fan base because, of course, sort of some series are very strong in countries like United States, whereby, there are more national series and their percentage of their fans. But from the global point of view, you can see how Formula One still stacks up. There are 500 million Formula One fans. That's still, whether it's 506 million or whether it's 565 million, it's still a very large fan base. The cumulative audience is the number of people that watch on TV, and you'll see that Formula One is up there with the big names. And of course, Formula One only actually has 20, depending on which year we are in, but we're going to have 22 or 23 races this year. And whereas Premier League football, which is the second one there, has obviously, there are 10 games every week. And again, the good thing about Formula One is it continues to draw large audiences. And this is a measure of how we do it with large audiences. And whilst the fan base, as we say, the live is at the bottom there, the live race is about the same as the fan base. I think what's more important rather than numbers is actually, sort of what we call the demographics of the fans, which is actually what attracts sponsors to Formula One. And as I mentioned before, the gender split is actually very, sort of very encouraging now. Many years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, you would probably have an 80% male, 20% female split. That is coming now a third, 2/3, which is very attractive for sponsors. And, the decision, what their occupation is. Formula One fans against sports fans are very, sort of interested. And also what's good about it is that what we say about, from a sponsorship point of view, their earning capacity and their disposable income is higher than generally the general sports fans. And of course, we also have the age groups as well. So Formula One fans also are interested in other sports. And I think that this is, from a sponsorship point of view, is actually quite interesting. And you will notice that quite a lot of sponsors in Formula One are actually sponsors in other sports. You've got Emirates who are sponsors in other sports, Rolex. So it's not specifically to Formula One. And what this means is that there is a cross correlation to other sports, and therefore it's very important when someone's watching a Formula One race from a sponsor's point of view, that they also know that Rolex is sponsoring tennis or golf or things like that. And you also know that, you know, the areas of interest of Formula One fans are listening to music, dining out, sports in general, and sports on TV. So from a sponsorship point of view, and as I was saying, how this has changed over the years, it's very important to know exactly what your fans are doing. And these are some other situations whereby the average age, as I said, is 40, but actually going down now. 35% are in the top income brands. They like games and consoles, which is why the esports at the beginning of the season last year was so popular. They're interested in cars, which actually is obviously important for sponsors. So the story for Formula One for sponsorship is good and attractive. And I think the worries that, as I mentioned, of the first two slides that I had, were talking about the size of sponsorship deal. Formula One now is more accessible than it has ever been for, I won't say low sponsorships, but a medium price sponsorships, which is encouraging. It's very active in the use of media. We talked about how the consumption of media, that's very important too. And you can see the products that they are likely to buy in the next year. And whilst unfortunately air travel is hopefully next year will be all right. But I mean, when this research was done, it was looking to 2020 and 2020. That probably hasn't happened now. But again, there is the issue also in any sports sponsorship at the moment with regard to betting services, and indeed they're involved in that. These are you know, full slides, but it just shows that football and where football is high in interested, the general population, football is still very popular. Motorsport comes in the millennials, as we were talking about. That is where the challenge in Formula One, or challenge in motorsport, is to rise them up through the younger audience. Well, I mentioned before, and I'm conscious of the time also, I mentioned before the importance of individual countries. Driver nationality has a significant impact on Formula One viewers across the globe. Leclerc and Gasly are driving interest in France, Perez for Mexico, Verstappen for Holland, and now we have the wonderful situation where Mick Schumacher is now coming into Formula One in Germany. And Middle East is showing significant interest because of the new events in the Middle East as well. I won't go through these, and if you would like a copy of this presentation, I'd be delighted. You just send me a note. I'd be delighted to send it. But the good thing is that the future of Formula One is good. It is, from a sponsorship point of view, it's a very attractive proposition. And really, what does all this show? The sponsorship landscape is changing, even pre-COVID-19. Global sponsorship is adapting to the changes. Sponsorship is driven by the fans, and you will notice the emphasis that Formula One has put on fans in the way that they are engaging with fans. And I think what most importantly is that sponsorship is an effective method of reaching those fans. Motorsport sponsorship is in good health, but it does need to evolve with all the reasons why I said earlier on. And the motorsport fan is interested. The interest is high. Diversity of fans, we talked about age and race and social situation is getting more balanced. And at the end of the day, the consumption of sport will always continue to change. And I'll just end up by saying that I think despite last year, where every business in sport and sponsorship was having a tough time, I think that, you know, the future is exciting. It's focused our minds, and I think that will be the last thing that I will say. That thank you for your attention, and please let me have any questions you have. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Geach. A very interesting presentation. I haven't realized that there was such a long time ago that Bernie Ecclestone used to say, don't get too much about young people, they cannot afford a Rolex. So you remember that, huh?
Yeah, I do. No,
A lot of things have changed since then. Huh?
I think his expression was, "We're not interested in any fan who can't afford a Rolex or bank with UBS." I think that was the thing.
So, with fans not being able to attend races in person, what is the biggest change that the motorsport industry needs to make in order to generate additional value for sponsors?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? It was a little bit fuzzy.
Yes, of course. With fans not being able to attend races in person, what is the biggest change that the motorsport industry needs to make in order to generate additional value for sponsors?
I think it really is that the industry, and I'm talking about not only Formula One, but I think that the motorsport industry has got to keep the interest high. I think, as I say, the esports program last year increased interest, but more importantly, a lot of the sponsors who are involved in the live show actually transferred some of their budget to the esports situation. I think esports, whether you're a fan or not of esports, is very important. I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, digital, social. Again, we've there are mixed views about how social is used with the situation in America with Twitter and things like that. But I think what the industry has got to do is, I said in some of the slides, is produce content which will be interested to the younger people too. And sponsors are very interested now in not only being involved in putting a sticker on the car, but actually, being involved in out of scope activities with the personalities.
The second question, do you believe that Formula One having more drivers with big character can attract more sponsorship, or would they fear a potential association with drivers that actively express themselves on social political issues?
I mean, are we talking about where drivers who come in with money, with sponsors, and that sort of thing? Is that the question?
We're talking about drivers that they express themselves in social political issues. We're talking about drivers that they have tempered characters. They talk fluently about anything. Does that attract sponsorship, or the sponsor fear a potential association with these drivers?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously this year there's been quite a lot of issue with regard to Black Lives Matter and things like that, which are political and social issues. I think that certainly I haven't had any pushback from any sponsors who have said that they don't want political and social issues to be negated by people. I think that sponsorship should really reflect what the issues are in the world. There have been discussions about whether motorsport should go to Saudi Arabia because of the human rights issues. I think that there is a fine balance between political issues and sport. And I think we had it many years ago with regard to the Olympics about where to have the Olympics. So I think there's a fine line.
E-racing NASCAR were the first to respond to the new circumstances. How did you manage to do so? What has happened with sponsorship revenues?
What's happened generally with sponsorship revenues?
For e-racing NASCAR, were the first to respond to the new circumstances. How did you manage to do that? And what happened with sponsorship revenues at e-racing NASCAR?
I mean, I think sponsorship, sort of there were changes in the way that NASCAR had their, the series, and they went down for some time. NASCAR interest went down, and it was very much a USA interest. And I think the sponsorship revenues did go down. But I think with the evolving of different data streams and different, sort of ways of consumption of the different sports, both the rights holders, and I think I covered it with regard to how rights holders and sponsors should work together more to evolve how they want to be involved in the sport.
All right, Mr. Geach, thank you very much for all the things we learned today. And thank you very much for what you told to us.
That's a pleasure.